Welcome to our 9th town hall. Last summer, I pledged to hold 10 town halls in the 10 months before the primary, and we're going to exceed that number. To protect the community during the coronavirus pandemic, we've suspended all in-person campaigning for nearly 7 weeks and shifted all campaign activity to online and virtual events like this one. This is our 3rd online town hall, and the others may be replayed on my website using the town hall link, perrygershon.com/townhall. Joining me tonight will be 2 medical experts to share their expertise as we take questions from you, our audience. First, before I make the introductions, let me address 2 realities. We're trailblazing with each day of the campaign. There is no script for success, no easy set of answers, and the outcome remains unknown, but it's one we all have the ability to change. Our day-to-day lives are different. Although we expect it to get easier in the near future, the probability of a return to the old normal will not be for an extended period of time. Information evolves on a daily basis, and we always must process the facts that are available to us and try to separate them from political spin. That is why I'm holding these town halls and why I've brought together these experts who can give good guidance on the facts and share their thoughts for the future. The second reality is that through all of this chaos and uprooting of our lives, there are political campaigns going on that will affect our future, whether that be for the next president of the United States, for control of the Senate, or for Congress here in New York 1. I am still running to unseat Lee Zeldin, and I still need you to vote for me on June 23rd. Absentee ballots are being mailed to all absentee ballot applications are being mailed to all registered Democrats in New York 1. And you will need to return those ballot applications to have an actual ballot sent to you. Governor Cuomo has stated all people should cite temporary illness as the reason for voting absentee. People will still have the option to vote in person, even if you request an absentee ballot, but don't try to vote twice. This crisis has shown us all the importance of leadership. The focus tonight will be on coronavirus, but all questions are fair game. Bear in mind that it's precisely because I'm a candidate for Congress that I'm able to bring together residents and experts as we are doing. So let me kick off the evening now with a brief introduction of each guest and permit them a minute or so to introduce themselves. Then we can jump to questions. First, once again, we have Dr. William Schaffner, Professor of Preventative Medicine and the Division of Infectious Diseases at Vanderbilt. Dr. Schaffner is a nationally renowned expert, frequently working with the CDC. He's often invited to comment in local and national media, translating research advances and public health events into language that most of us can understand. Dr. Schaffner, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Everyone else on this broadcast. I, as you say, am an internist, infectious disease specialist, and I've taken care of many, many patients with serious infectious diseases over the years. My other foot has always been in public health, and I've never been able to choose between my 2 loves. I work very strongly with my state health department and with the CDC and have been involved in communicable disease control for many, many communicable diseases over the years. Good to be with you to discuss these issues that relate to us regarding COVID-19, the most serious public health communicable disease that I've encountered during my career.
Thank you for your insights, Dr. Schaffner. Next, we have another returning guest, Dr. Robin Gershon, Clinical Professor of Epidemiology at the NYU School of Public Health. Dr. Gershon is an interdisciplinary occupational and environmental health and safety researcher with extensive experience in the areas of disaster preparedness and healthcare safety. Robin, by the way, is also my aunt and was our special guest in our first online town hall. Robin, floor is yours.
Thank you, Perry, and it's great to be back. And we should point out that I'm your very much younger aunt. It's great to be here. I think at this incredible time in history, it's the most important thing for us to be together as a community, to share our concerns, talk about our issues, ask questions, hopefully get some good answers. Right now, leadership is what we are pining for. We absolutely are demanding it. So I'm so proud of you and so glad that you're hosting this important town hall, and so grateful to be with all of you out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Appreciate it. And now, final introduction to Hannah Jeffrey, my campaign manager, who, like the last two online town halls we did, will be reading the questions to us throughout the evening. Okay, Hannah, why don't you kick us off with our first question?
With pleasure, Perry. And I also want to let people know who are on Zoom that we have a Spanish interpreter. So if you are wanting to listen to this in Spanish, or if you know anyone who is wanting to listen to this in Spanish, look at the bottom of your screen and put your cursor down there, and you'll see that there is on your right, or I believe, a little widget that says English or Spanish. And so you can click that and it'll show you the Spanish speaking channel so you can listen in. And thank you so much, Anna, for being on here today. Okay, so our first question, Perry, is from Cindy in Patchogue. She says, today the governor talked about reopening the economy, Is that safe for New Yorkers?
Cindy, that's a great question. And I personally have a lot of confidence in the way Governor Cuomo is planning to roll this out. Unlike states like Georgia, he's not basically opening things up and saying, have at it. He's waiting until we have adequate testing so that we can get our arms around the virus, and further contact tracing so that when we identify a case of coronavirus, we can get it walled off from the rest of the population before it starts to spread like it did before. Those are the critical steps towards reopening our economy. But we must find a way to move the economy again. I mentioned in my opening that we're going to return to essentially a new normal. It won't be what we had before. We're going to have to change our lives. There will be social distancing is going to be with us until we have a vaccine. And I'll let the others comment on that as well. But we have to find a way to function and move our lives along during that period of time. And I hope throughout this evening, as we take questions, we can probe a little bit further into what reopening the economy means for all of us and how we can get there. Dr. Schaffner or Dr. Gershon, do you have anything to add?
I think definitely we are going to see social distancing for an extended period. Even once we open up, at least in our tri-state area here, we just have so many people, perhaps as much as 75% of us, who have no immunity whatsoever. And so it seems like just making it open to all of us is going to be a real problem, and I don't think that's going to happen. I see William Schaffner is making a comment here, Perry. Let me get off and let William.
I think, are you unable to hear Dr. Schaffner? Okay, one moment, folks. We've got some technical stuff happening.
Right, while you finish that off, I think one of the important things that Governor Cuomo said today is that he's going to be very seriously mindful of our regional openings. So that is, we're not just going to do, say, New York City without taking consideration the greater New York area. And I think that's a really smart move. And I'll be interested to see how it happens. I just saw today that Nassau County may be one of the first counties that opened, but Perry, perhaps you have some intel on that.
I'm just trying to get to Dr. Schaffner. I'm sorry. Okay. Robin, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
I read somewhere today that Nassau County will be one of the first counties to open. Do you have some more recent intel on that?
I don't. Laura, the county executive, Laura Curran, was holding a briefing, but I did not have a chance to listen today. So I'm unfortunately not up to date on that. And I apologize. Hannah, do you want to go on with another question while we're trying to
Yes.
solve the technical problems?
Okay. Yeah. Give me one moment. Perry, should I ask you a question or should I ask Dr. Gershon a question?
Why don't you go to me?
Okay, great. So Perry, this is a question from Lori in East Patchogue. I'll try to mix it up more. Sorry, guys. The question is, everyone needs to know the rules and dates necessary for voting by absentee ballot for this upcoming primary. Will your campaign be getting the word out, advertising this information in different formats for all different ages and different platforms?
Absolutely, yes. We've already started. I mentioned a little bit about absentee ballots in the opening, but it's an evolving picture. This Board of Elections is going to be mailing absentee ballot applications to all registered Democrats. So that's the first step in the process. You will get one. And if you don't, you should contact the Board of Elections directly. We don't know yet what date they're going to be mailed out, but I imagine it won't be before that long. When you mail your ballot application in, the Board of Elections will receive it and they will send you a ballot. Again, we don't know the timing, but my guess is that it will be sometime in June, and you will have until Election Day, June 23rd, to return that absentee ballot. I think it has to be postmarked the day before Election Day, by the 22nd, if they're playing by the rules of before. But they will provide further guidance as we get closer. And our campaign will continue to try to get that information out to everybody. But it's critical in times like these that everyone who can vote is able to vote. And that's the theme that the governor is following in every way he can to try to maximize participation, but not endanger anybody with the health crisis. Hannah, you want to go on?
Yes. Okay. So this question is from Bob. We got this on Zoom. Just came in, and he says, in the last 250 years, there have been 5 serious pandemics. The so-called second wave has been as bad or worse than the first. Since acquired immunity is unknown at this time, what do you suspect the timing of a second wave might be, and would the current mitigation efforts need to be reintroduced?
I'm going to start and then turn it over to our medical experts. I hope are both on the call, but I can't tell from here. But no, okay. Well, we have Dr. Gershon will be able to answer a little bit. The chances of a second wave are relatively high, from what I understand. The first wave has peaked and it's going down right now. And we expect to have some period of time where we're much more disease-free. But the virus is not out of the population, and people's immunity and society's immunity is not there yet. So we're going to need to figure something out. We're going to hope that the social distancing keeps it under control. But if for whatever reason it starts to come back, we will see that second wave. And it may not happen in New York. It may happen in other areas that are following the rules less stringently. So those are the things I think we have to look out for. Dr. Gershon?
Harry, I completely agree. And one thing we should keep in mind, in 1918, when they had that pandemic, which was dreadful with hundreds of millions of people killed. I think it was 50 to 100 million. But though within another year and a half, it actually dissipated, it became part of the regular seasonal influenza, and it was much less deadly. We have to hope that something like this happens here, but of course, COVID is not an influenza virus. And so it has been acting very differently than any other previous influenza like H1N1. But I do believe that there will be a second wave. I think Perry's absolutely correct. We will have people coming in from other places where it's prevalent, even here, of course, within the city. And then all of us who are not immune in any way, shape, or form may get it, and we may experience a second wave. I know all the modelers are saying that. How big it will be, we simply don't know at this time. I have also heard that they're recommending that people who can telecommute for work and can keep their work going through telecommuting should do so to lessen the number of people that are out and about in the population. So every step that we can take to lessen the risk for those of us who are very vulnerable would be a great step forward.
Dr. Schaffner?
My goodness.
You're on. You're on. We hear you.
Okay, that's good. All right. Sorry for the technical difficulty.
So the question was about a second wave. Do you expect there to be a second wave at some point? And you and I talked about this a little bit before, so I know you have a lot to add.
Well, a second wave is sometimes defined in two different ways. One is if we open up too soon, there may be a lot of COVID-19 transmission and we'll get what's called a second wave. The other way that term has been used is there is an expected, hoped for diminution of COVID-19 with the warm weather. Well, we don't know whether that'll happen, but let's assume that it does. And then people have asked, will there be a second wave in the fall or in the winter along with influenza? And I surely do believe that we will be dealing with both influenza and with COVID-19 this next winter. We'll have a double barrel influenza season, I'm afraid.
That unfortunately is what Dr. Redfield of the CDC said before the president tried to squash it and rewrite history and say he didn't really say it. But one thing that interests me, and Dr. Gershon brought it up, is the possibility of this virus mutating in a positive way. What do you think are the chances of that?
Well, all I'll say is so far this RNA virus mutates a little bit, just enough so that sometimes molecular virologists can track kind of where it came from, whether from Europe or from Asia. But basically, so far, the virus has been pretty stable. In a sense, that's a very good thing, because if we're creating vaccines now, we need to have the virus be the same when the vaccines come online and we start to use them. So the relative stability of the virus so far is a good thing, I think.
That's interesting. That's great to know. Okay, Hannah, you want to go to the next question, please?
Yes, and this one is actually relevant for what was just being talked about. So Perry, this question is from Harmon on Facebook. The question is, it says for Dr. Schaffner. I just read there has never been a vaccine developed for coronavirus. Do you think that there will never be a vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, actually, vaccines were developed for both SARS and MERS They just never reached fruition because those diseases rather went away. And actually, that scientific information was of great assistance in starting vaccine development against COVID-19. Gave us a real scientific head start. And as folks probably know, there are already vaccine candidates that have started clinical trials. Yes, my fingers and my toes are crossed that we will develop a vaccine that's both safe and effective against COVID-19.
And let me follow that up. What kind of a time frame do you think is realistic for a vaccine? Is it the fall? Is it next spring? Is it 2 years from now? Just give people some context to manage expectations.
So all of the pronouncements from Dr. Fauci and from others regarding the development of the vaccine indicate that it's at least a year away. And of course, then we have to manufacture sufficient so we can deliver it. The one exception are the British. They think they're on a fast track. They think they're on a sprint rather than a marathon. And some of them have said they think their clinical trials will actually be finished by this fall. Well, good luck to them, mate. But and I hope they win the race because we need that vaccine as soon as possible. But you can detect I'm a little skeptical that they'll make it.
Yeah, well, I wish them all the best as well, and I hope everyone on this call does. Hannah, why don't you go to the next question, please?
Okay. So we have a lot of people asking about the June 23rd primary. So Deborah just sent us a question on Zoom. Deborah asks, I received an email today that the June 23rd primary is canceled. Does this impact the congressional primary? So I think there's a lot of confusion on that.
Deborah, that is a great question, and I'm really glad you asked it because it's something that should be clarified. The congressional primary and also the state primaries for state Senate and Assembly have always been scheduled for June 23rd, and those dates are still unchanged. Those primaries are on. The presidential primary was originally scheduled for April 28th, which is tomorrow. Some weeks ago, Governor Cuomo announced that the presidential primary was going to be delayed and held the same day as the other primaries that were already on the calendar. That would have been a good thing. But then they realized that the presidential primary isn't answering the question anymore. There's only one candidate still in the running. And for that reason, they've decided to cancel the presidential primary altogether. And the advantage of doing that, for people who are wondering, is that there are many areas in the state that wouldn't otherwise have a primary. And there's no reason to go through the election process there, which, given everything that's going on, is expensive and puts people at risk. So in order to do the right thing for everyone, for maximum good, they canceled the presidential primary, canceled the primary in areas that don't have a state or congressional primary race. But the congressional primaries, like here in New York 1, and the state primaries for state Senate and for Assembly are still going on as usual. You will have the ability to vote by absentee ballot. Everyone has that ability. You don't need a special excuse like you normally do. And you will also have the ability to vote in person. But they're still going to have to provide more detail, as I mentioned earlier, as to how that process is going to work. Hannah?
Okay. So this next question, sorry, I'm looking at my phone with the question. This next question came from Zoom, from Janet. Janet says, my husband had the virus and is now considered recovered. He was tested for antibodies so he could donate plasma and was told his antibody level is low, so they didn't need his blood. Can you talk about antibody levels and what that really means?
That's a great question. Was it Janet?
Janet, yeah.
Thank you, Janet. That's a great question. And I'm going to turn it over to the medical experts to talk about it more. Robin, why don't you start, and then Dr. Schaffner.
This is definitely a question for Dr. Schaffner because I'm a public health expert. And actually, I had that very same question. Bill, if you could tell us how you can have a virus like this and somehow not be immune, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, this is a big mess at the moment because antibody tests are just coming online. Some of you may have heard that the Food and Drug Administration has not validated them. So we don't know how good they are. And some of the scientific work already on these newly released tests says that they're not very reliable. They're not sufficiently accurate. Also, some of them measure the quantity of antibody and others just give you a yes, no answer. As in all infectious diseases, when people get infected, some people get more antibody and some people get less antibody, but usually that antibody level correlates with protection. We think that's the case here with COVID-19, but we haven't demonstrated it yet. So we're right in the middle of a process of learning a lot with some antibody tests that are still not completely reliable. Hang tight. I'm sorry your husband's test was kind of indeterminate. I'll bet he's protected though.
Thank you for that answer, but let me follow it up with a question that I was thinking of. I've read instances of people in Asia who supposedly had recovered from COVID-19 and then tested positive again for COVID-19. Do you think that's people being reinfected, or is it just some other abnormality with the test?
It could be, Perry, an abnormality of the test. However, more and more people are now finding out, now that we have more testing resources, they're testing people who recovered. And what they're discovering is that although they've recovered, they can still find evidence of the virus for days and sometimes substantially longer in those tests, those nasal swab type tests. Whether that means the virus is alive or not and capable of being transmitted to others, nobody still knows. Perhaps those are just, if you will, dead soldiers, just viral fragments that are left over from the acute infection.
That's great. That's a great answer. That actually makes me feel a little bit better. Hannah, why don't you go on to the next question?
Yes, and this next question is about vaccines. This is from Michael on Zoom. The Oxford Vaccine Group is moving quickly. No American producer has agreed to make it. They have producers from elsewhere in the world. Will we in the USA be able to get the vaccine if the Oxford Group succeeds? Will we be last in line?
Well, fortunately, the last I checked, we still have good relations with England, and where those relations aren't in jeopardy. So I don't think we'll be last in line. I do think that as the vaccine development gets further along, and it appears that the Oxford Group or some other group are close to having something that's production ready, we will gear up development in America of that vaccine. And if I were in government, and this is in part why I'm running for government, I would be doing everything in my power to bring scientists of the world community together, rather than competing with one another to come up with the first vaccine, to have a little more group think. Let's share our knowledge and our expertise. So as soon as one group makes an advancement, let's spread that the wealth to the other groups. And let's try to develop a vaccine that much faster by information sharing. It blows me away that we're not doing more of that, and that this rhetoric isn't more common, what I just said. Dr. Schaffner, what do you think?
Well, Perry, we can always use more of that. But let me be a little bit more encouraging. I think there's been a fair amount of discussion between the National Institutes of Health and various private companies. In fact, there are public-private partnerships working to develop vaccines of different types. We're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. And so there's been a fair amount of sharing already. Of course, there's a little bit of competition, so perhaps they're not sharing completely, but nonetheless, all the companies know what the others are up to and are watching the developments in parallel. And that Oxford group, those are the British who think that they may be already ready to manufacture come this fall. As you said, we all
I'm afraid we lost you again in your audio. So why don't we move on? Hannah, why don't we go to the next question?
Okay. This next question is from Jacob in Amagansett. I heard that a tiger had contracted COVID-19. Two-part question. One, should I be worried about my cats being carriers? And two, did you watch Tiger King and did you like it?
Great, good back. Unfortunately, I did not watch Tiger King, but I had certainly read about the big cats at the Bronx Zoo being infected. It got a lot of press, and it's a little bit scary to know that this disease is that transmissible. To my knowledge, there's been no infection of pets, dogs or cats. And it's comforting that things hopefully will stay that way. Either of the two medical experts on that?
I can jump in on this. Actually, there have been 2 cats in New York City that have gotten it from their owners. And the large cats at the zoo got it from one of the keepers. It's very unusual. It's very rare. I did see 1 or 2 reports out in Asia of some transmission to dogs. In one case, it was a Pekingese. I don't know what the other dog was. It seems very unusual and rare. And from what I hear, the cats and the large cats are all doing well.
That's good. Actually, Dr. Schaffner, since you're back, let me go back to the vaccine question, because there was one thing on my mind. I think it's critical, based on what you said, that everybody get a flu vaccine before next winter, before the next flu season. And I would imagine it's even more important now than ever to protect yourself from flu, because there are going to be potentially 2 different epidemics simultaneously. But is there any fear that a flu vaccine could hurt your immunity to COVID or your ability to fight COVID?
Perry, you're singing my song. I'm so glad you're talking about flu vaccine. We think it's a little bit unusual. Here we are in May and or April, and we're talking about flu vaccine. We need to think about it in advance. This year, more than ever, I think it's important to get influenza vaccine. Not to go on too long about it, we all know it's an imperfect vaccine. It's not a perfect vaccine, but it prevents many infections every year, and many of those who get the vaccine and still get flu get a milder case. There is nothing about the flu vaccine that in any way will adversely affect you regarding COVID-19. They're 2 totally separate issues, but let's all get our flu shots.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly will, and I hope everybody on this call does. Hannah, why don't we go to the next question, please?
Okay. So next question is from Carissa on Facebook. And actually, we've had another question about this as well. For those of us who haven't received our stimulus checks and the Get My Payment app is useless, what can we do?
Carissa, that is a great question. And let me take a step back. and try to explain it as best I can. But I don't think there's a great, perfect explanation as to why so many people have not gotten their stimulus checks. What I do know is that many people, when they file their taxes for a refund, they agree to share some of the percentage of that refund with their tax preparer. And because the government won't issue checks directly to tax preparers, what the arrangement that people follow is to have the refund check go to a third-party bank, and then that third-party bank splits it, the refund between the taxpayer and the tax professional by whatever agreement was made between the two. That all works fine for normal refunds. But the problem now is that the government sent the stimulus checks to the entities, to the people, or whoever got the refund when they last filed their tax return. And a lot of banks, instead of people, got these stimulus checks, and they didn't know what to do with it, so they simply returned the money back to the federal government. That has caused a big logjam in terms of processing refund checks, because the government was not processing stimulus money, because the government wasn't prepared to have the money come back to them. I'm hopeful that this will get cleared out in the next few weeks, but money will come to you, but it's a matter of timing. And we just need to see that worked out. Our government has just passed new funding for the PPP program, and we're going to hopefully see that improved, and there may be some questions about that coming up. But in terms of stimulus money, it's just a matter of they're getting the kinks out of the system. You may end up getting a check even though you thought you should have gotten an electronic refund. And that's unfortunate because the checks take much, much longer to process. Hannah, why don't you go on to the next question?
Okay, great. So this next question is from Chuck from Zoom. Perry, if you were here sitting with Lee Zeldin, what would you say to him about the federal government response to the pandemic?
I'm going to tell you what I, Perry, think of the federal government's response to the pandemic. It has been inextricably slow, and as a result of that, it has caused the pandemic to be a whole lot worse than it otherwise needed to be in America. China had the first case, and China was slow and dragged their feet in reporting it. So China certainly has blame in what happened. But the United States was aware in January of what was happening in China. And we did very little, if anything, to prepare for the virus to hit the United States. We did not appropriately prepare testing. We did not appropriately prepare to make the PPE that we need to handle the testing. So when the virus got here, we couldn't deal with it. We tried to sweep it under the rug and say it wasn't going to happen. The result of that, it got established. Cuomo estimated last week that in New York, 15,000 people were infected in February, and we didn't even know that. That's how this thing became as bad as it was in our state, in Long Island, and in New York City. And we need to learn from it, that the government has a responsibility to take these things seriously. Listen to Bill Gates if you have a chance. He talks about it a lot. And we're still slow. We still don't have the testing that we should have. You hear us talking about when the testing is available. Well, we did our first town hall on March 16th, and we were talking about when the testing would be available. It's now 7 weeks later or so, and the testing's still not at the level that it should be at. And Trump still hasn't said, I messed up. So I do establish culpability with our government for not handling this better. Hannah, why don't you go on to the next question?
Sure. And before I do, I just want to encourage people to be submitting questions to the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can submit questions where it says Q&A, just type it in there. If you are on Facebook and watching on the Facebook live stream, please just write a question in the comment section of Facebook Live. I also want to remind folks that we do have an interpreter, a Spanish-speaking interpreter. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see where it says, it'll say either English or Spanish. There's a little widget at the bottom there. And if you click on it, you can select your channel to be able to listen to interpretation if that is something you would like to do.
So before you go on, Hannah, just so people know, we have over 200 people tuned in right now between the two platforms. So we should be getting a lot of questions. Keep them coming. We're monitoring all the different channels that you can submit them.
Great. That is awesome. Okay, so this next question is from Aaron. His question is about valved masks. I heard my mask protects you. So why haven't I heard anything about valved N95s that I see people wearing? Am I in danger if someone is infected and breathing near me and has a valved N95 mask?
All right, so if I understand the question properly, you're asking, are we at risk if someone is wearing an N95 mask as opposed to just a regular cloth mask? Is that putting other people that we're talking to at risk? I'm going to leave that to the health professionals.
We never use those kinds of masks in healthcare. We use N95 for our most acutely potentially exposed healthcare providers, and we're saving the regular surgical masks for everyone else in healthcare. And we're asking people to use cloth masks or anything they can use, even a bandana or something. This valve mask, I really don't know enough about to know if when you expire the air, if you're spreading the virus, but I think that they are not protected in the same way as air coming into the mask, but let's see if Bill has more intel on that.
I actually have about as much knowledge of it as do you. That sounds like a mask that's used in a dusty environment rather than a healthcare environment. The N95s that we use in the healthcare environment protect both going in and going out.
I can tell you, speaking as a normal citizen, I go to the supermarket and I wear just a regular surgical mask. These are available on Amazon and other channels. And I don't see the need why people would go out of their way to get these more highfalutin masks when the regular one meets the standard for what our healthcare people are recommending. Hannah, why don't you go on to the next question?
Sure. This question is from Rob on Zoom. Rob says, I'm in a senior community in Port Jeff Station. Everyone here is scared to go out, even if they say that you can. What are we to do? Should we be staying homebound?
Rob, the best advice I can give you right now is stay home as long as you can. I'll leave it to the experts to go from here, but I can tell you the advice I give my parents who are medical professionals is to stay inside. There's no reason why people who don't need to go out should be going out and putting themselves at risk. Dr. Schachter?
I think I have a little bit more of a modified view, Perry, in that some of those people may indeed have to go to the grocery store periodically or to the pharmacy. And when you do that, obviously wear your mask, keep your distance from people, and wash your hands when you get home. And if you're being very meticulous, wipe down those groceries after you bring them into the house. And as to the cabin fever issue, again, I'm a little more tolerant. If you just go out where there's nobody else around, wear the mask, keep your distance, taking a little breath of fresh air and looking up into the sunshine. I think that that's a very nice thing to do. And if you can get some exercise, again, not around anyone, but keep that mask on when you're in public, I think that that's an okay thing to do. It aids your mental health, but adhere to all that social distancing.
Bill, I have a question for you. Some of my colleagues from UCSF in San Francisco who are infection control gurus, they are recommending that when you come in, you take off your mask, you wash your hands. They recommend that you wash your face and even wash inside with soap and water, the inside part of your nose. Does that sound like good advice to you?
Well, it certainly sounds like going the extra mile. I haven't heard that locally, and I don't know of anyone who does it. My wife, she's actually the hand washing guru in our house. You can't get through the door, take off your jacket, and you must go directly to the sink. But we don't wash our faces and the inside of our mouths. No, we haven't done that.
My husband actually takes a full shower when he comes back from grocery shopping.
Wow. Good for him. And he's one clean husband, Robin.
All right. Hannah, why don't you go on to the next question?
Okay, so this question is from EJ on Facebook. Lee Zeldin has said nothing about McConnell's statement that New York and other states should declare bankruptcy rather than get federal aid. What does Perry think about this, and what does he think Zeldin should be doing about McConnell's statement?
First off, McConnell's statement that New York should go, big states should go bankrupt rather than receive federal aid, it's despicable. And Cuomo called him out on it, and Peter King called him out on it immediately. And certainly I did. But yet you have to wonder why Zeldin took as much time as he did before he said a word. Interestingly, tonight, this evening, the New York Post did a story that Zeldin finally spoke up and said, yes, states should get aid. He did not condemn McConnell, but you have to wonder why he didn't do that, because McConnell's statement was just disgusting. But at least Zeldin came to the defense of New York and said that the federal government has an obligation to support its states. I think people should take comfort in that statement, because if Lee Zeldin is willing to go that far, I think you can take comfort that the Congress is going to pass legislation to protect the states. Nobody wants to see New York and other big states go bankrupt and really impinge upon the first responders, because they'll be the ones who lose. The police, the school teachers, the firefighters, the nurses, the people who have been dealing with the brunt of coronavirus and who we are going to need in recovery. To cut them off with the state bankruptcies is insane. And you got to wonder why McConnell said that. But it certainly, the sense I get from what I hear is that people are going the other way. You don't see a chorus of even Republicans coming to McConnell's defense anymore. Zeldin was late, but at least he sounds like he's finally coming to the right side. Hannah, you want to go to the next question, please?
Sure. So this is from Barry on Zoom. Barry says, Perry, with the likelihood that a significant number of small businesses, restaurants, etc., will never reopen, what do you think the future for New York and Long Island will look like in the future?
Barry, that is a good question, and I'm an optimist. So I think we are going to recover, and we will ultimately get back to a better level than where we started. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not automatic. And you're right, we're going to see many of the businesses that we relied on and that relied on us not manage to reopen. And if they do reopen, to reopen with fewer employees and to really cause people to struggle. But new businesses will open up. I mean, out of every situation in crisis, there's also opportunity. And I think we will see development here on Long Island. There are all kinds of ways we can have positive things come out of this eventually. Clean energy development is the direction we should be going in. And the jobs here on Long Island in clean energy potentially are huge. Jobs that pay $40 an hour instead of $15 an hour could be the future that we're all going to face going down the road. If we invest in infrastructure, as the government and even Trump is talking about, as part of a stimulus or recovery act, that's high-paying jobs. Those are good jobs, much better than some of the small business jobs that we've lost in restaurants. And we will innovate. We will find new small businesses too. The American spirit is great at that. And I have full confidence that we'll find our way. It will just take time, and we're going to have to be patient and have a good resolve. Let the government and private industry work together. And we have to do it together. It can't be one or the other. Hannah, why don't you go to the next question, please?
Okay. This next question is from David. He says, as the number of new COVID cases decrease and the threat of a second wave looms, will there be a role for contact tracing? Isn't now the time to get ready and establish armies of volunteers to do the job? Not all local health departments are going to be on the same page for this. Should there be, or are there, federal CDC guidelines?
I'll take this one, Perry. This is something that came up just today. I had an email message from the Department of Health here in New York City. They want to hire many of our students to be the contact tracers. They're also linking them to training that's being put out by CDC to make sure that they are trained properly. But they are about to hire an army of these contact tracers. Now that's here in New York City. Will every county be able to do that? I'm hopeful that they will. I know out in Long Island, certainly you have a lot of healthcare, public health workers that can easily take on that task. You have a lot of students out in Stony Brook, the other schools out there. So hopefully we can mobilize this small army of people, and will happen fast.
Dr. Schaffner, do you want to add to that? Or then I actually have some thoughts.
I think local health departments are thinking about that all over the country. I know that right here in Nashville, we used to have 4 people who do contact tracing. In the midst of COVID, we've been able to hire over 30. They're trained and they're starting to do contact tracing as we speak. So we're very pleased to have them on board. We agree. Good testing, find the cases, do the contact tracing, get everybody into care who needs care, isolate those people who are sick, and we'll help keep the level of COVID transmission down.
That's great. That's the goal. So let me add, I have seen people talking about it here on Long Island in the East End where I am. And I think it's important that people show their willingness to want to participate in this, because we're going to need to organize the bodies. We're not ready to start tracing contacts until we have testing, because the two need to be done in conjunction with one another. But they're both critical. There's also a role for technology in contact tracing. Apple and Google have come up with software for your iPhone and your Android phone that actually can help with contact tracing. And I think the software approach will make it a lot easier to get the required contact tracing done that we need. It's a lot easier to do contact tracing today than it would have been, say, 25 years ago, where we didn't have the technology. And being ahead of the game is important here too. The fact that Apple and Google are already working on it instead of waiting for Trump or whoever to say, well, let's think about contact tracing now. I think we're on the right path. Pam, you want to go on to the next question, please?
Sure. So this question came in on Facebook. Governor Cuomo said today that the random testing conducted to date suggests that around 25% of New York City residents carry the antibodies for COVID-19. Is this good news, bad news, or does it cut both ways?
I'll tell you my reaction, which is I was happy to hear that because it means that more people, significantly more people, have been infected than we thought. And the goal, if you're short of having a vaccine, is to get as much immunity into the population as we can. And this sounds like there's more in New York City than otherwise expected. I think the number here in Suffolk County is a little bit lower than the 25% of the city, but it's still better than the state average. And having said that, let me go to the medical experts.
I just saw, Perry, today that in Long Island, it's about 14.5%. And yes, I think on one hand, it's good because obviously that means in New York City, for instance, we certainly did not have roughly 2 million people coming into hospitals and needing ventilators. So many of them obviously had much milder cases. But it does mean to me that 75% of the people in New York City are not immune, and even larger proportion out in Long Island are not immune. So that to me is worrisome. But let's see what Bill has to say.
Well, Robin, I agree with you. It does cut both ways. First of all, it does say that more people have been infected than we knew, which means that there's a lot of asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic transmission. It also means that the overall fatality rate of COVID-19 is lower than we thought it was. But exactly as you say, in New York and surrounding areas, you're going to have the higher numbers. In much of the rest of the country, the notion is that we're still down around 5% of people who have been infected, which leaves 95% still susceptible. And that means that we could indeed have a large second wave come this fall. And it also means we can't ease up on social distancing, wearing masks, hand washing, watching those 6-foot distances between us, and largely hanging back, not rushing out to be out in crowds yet, because there's so many of us that are still susceptible.
Hey, let me ask a follow-up question to that. In our last town hall, and we talked a little bit, and I know I brought it up, of the supposed in-home antibody test, where you could, individuals could finger prick themselves and test like a pregnancy test for antibodies. And I thought those were coming soon. And I don't even hear about them as much anymore. What happened there?
If I may, they're still out there, and they're being manufactured, and other manufacturers are coming along with those sorts of tests, but their validity has yet to be demonstrated. And there are concerns that these tests may not be sufficiently rigorous and could give you a false negative test that is tell you you're negative, that you don't have antibodies, but you actually do, or false positive, which tell you that you have antibody, but you really don't. So the tests have to be validated. The concept is incredible. Finger stick and read it off the cassette within a minute or two. I mean, that would be wonderful, but we have to see that it works.
Great, thank you for that. And so hopefully something to look forward to. Hannah, why don't we go to the next question?
Okay, so this next question is from Maya in Greenport. How are small business owners supposed to get help? Why were so many unable to get money from the last stimulus bill? Is there help still available?
Maya, that is a great question. And certainly in theory, the PPP was a great idea. The idea of getting support to small businesses to keep them afloat through the economy and through the bad economy until people can go back to work. The idea was the government would lend money to small businesses at a cheap rate, relatively cheap rate, and if they kept their employees on, or a certain number of their employees, and they used the money for paying rent and mortgage and salaries, that this debt would get forgiven. The problem with it is that the program was so good, there was huge demand for it. And the second problem is that large companies had that demand as well as small companies. And too much of the money went to big companies and companies that didn't have the same need as some of the other companies that this program was originated for. Among the issues is that the banks were given the task of administering these programs, and banks gave favorable treatment to their better customers. That's what banks traditionally do. And there's nothing wrong with that per se when there's adequate money available for everyone. But when the money is limited, as we saw, then you need a better mechanism of overseeing the process. And among the problems that we have in the program, Trump fired the people responsible for oversight almost immediately. And there was nothing Congress could do about that. So Congress just appropriated more money and it became available today. I've heard different numbers quoted that they've made enough money available for days, maybe a week, and then they expect that money to run out again. Hopefully the banks will do a better job of making it available to true smaller businesses. Congress tried to add rules when the House modified what the Senate was trying to do. One of the things they were trying to do was to make sure more money would be available to small business. If you go back 2 weeks in time, the Republicans just tried in the Senate, to just send $250 billion more to PPP without any new strings, without any new rules. And that would have just made the same problem that much worse. The Democrats, to their credit, stood up and said, no, we need changes. We need money to fund hospitals, we need money to fund testing, and we need a better distribution of the PPP money. That is why Congress held the money up. That's what Zeldin was railing against while the bill was being negotiated, but it's what everyone's now come on board for. And I hope the system works better going forward. But we're going to have to see. And it's there to help, but it's certainly not an answer. There will need to be more stimulus and more ways to get money out to keep the economy, to allow the economy to come back to life. Hannah, why don't we go to the next question, please?
Okay. This next question is from Jeffrey from Zoom, came in on Zoom. Jeffrey asks, do you think it will be safe to go back to classroom teaching in public schools and in colleges in the fall?
Jeffrey, that is a great question. And I get it from my son, who's a junior in college. And I get it from constituents I talk to and from teachers. And I sure hope the answer is yes. And you can bifurcate it and talk about what happens in elementary and high school, and then college a little bit separately, because college typically have kids who are away from home and kind of living together. What you don't want is for kids to go to college, transmit the disease among themselves, and then come home and bring it back to their parents and their families. So that's what we have to be most careful of. But we must find a way to open our schools for our kids. I mean, talking to teachers here in New York One, it's critical that they be allowed to perform their duties as educators. It's such a pillar of our society. And the losers, if we don't get the children back to school, are the children themselves. So Robin or Bill, you want to talk about the health side of that?
Well, I can tell you that this is a huge problem for our school at NYU as we try to think about how to handle the more than 50,000 students that are in one program or another all throughout the world. And right now, the approach is that we hope to be open, at least for the undergraduates. Whether or not that will happen is not clear, but we are also preparing to have a much better quality of online education if it turns out we have to do distance learning. For the graduate students, it's much easier. A lot of our courses already are online, but for these undergraduates who may have to come and live in a dorm, that is really the problem, the congregate living, as you mentioned, Perry. But we are looking at the tea leaves as we speak, trying to figure out a way to do this. But I hope the lower schools, the middle schools, the lower schools can open. That may be more possible than perhaps these colleges. Let's see what Bill has to say.
We're all in the same boat, Robin and Perry. Certainly at Vanderbilt, final decisions haven't been made, and everyone, as Robin is suggesting, is trying to figure out how to make the collegiate experience as safe as possible, because we would all like to have students back on our campus. But we won't go back to the old normal. It will have to be a new normal. There will be more distance learning. There isn't any doubt. There will be some more separation. It's not clear that we'll have stadiums full of students cheering football teams because those are huge mass events that bring people very, very close together. So there likely will be modifications. The details are still being thought about, and we haven't made any final decisions yet here either.
Thank you. Let me just add one thing to that I thought of as you were speaking, and then I actually want to go back to a prior question. One of the things I read in the last day or so is schools saying how important it is that the universities have students back there because they need the tuition. I don't think for one second that is the major focus. There's a reason for these colleges exist, and it's not to get tuition money. It's to provide an experience for our children to help them mature and make them more ready for our society in America. And depriving those kids of that opportunity hurts us. And it's not a matter of tuition. I think we have to keep that in mind. But the other thing I want to go back to is on the question about McConnell, I focused on whether states should be allowed to go bankrupt. But there's some other things that should be talked about. There are really two issues. One is the way reimbursements are being handled right now. States are being reimbursed for the cost of the care they provide based on last year's Medicare formula, which is anything but representative of who's spending the money right now. Certain states are spending the bulk of the money because they have the bulk of the COVID cases. They're the ones that need to get federal money. And we have to, as a priority, allocate our money better to give it to the people who need it. And the second thing is there's a concept that McConnell missed completely, which is how tax money gets distributed. New York is a donor state. We give a lot more money to the federal government than we receive back. Other states, like Kentucky, where McConnell is a recipient state. They get more than they put in. So there's a certain unfairness that McConnell is guilty of, and we have to get past that. If you look at what the Republicans did to New York State, and New York residents and other residents of big states in the 2017 tax plan that they put through with the SALT cap, they put a cap on deductions for state and local income tax. And we need to get rid of that cap. That's another transfer of wealth from the big blue states to the smaller states. And we've seen with coronavirus, the big blue states need that money back. So I hope Congress puts a elimination of the SALT cap in the next bill that they pass. And I know it's on the table. And oh, by the way, in December, the House passed a bill to get rid of the SALT cap, and Zeldin voted against it. So we have to do better. Hannah, why don't we go to the next question?
Okay, this question is from Ilsa. She says, Perry, with numerous people looking to move out of the city, are there any plans to turn Southampton Stony Brook into a world-class hospital and research center? We have only one hospital with 127 beds in Southampton, and this is simply not sustainable.
I can certainly tell you that there are efforts to improve Southampton Stony Brook Hospital and to provide the highest class of service that we can. It would not make sense to build a facility the size of Stony Brook at Stony Brook because there isn't that much demand steady state. And hopefully there won't be that much use. Do we need more beds than we have at Stony Brook, Southampton? Yes, we do. And we have to find ways to improve that hospital. But that's in process and it will continue to be in process. We don't have waves of people moving here from the city. We have more people here at the moment than we usually do. But during the summer, we typically have high numbers of people out in the East End, and not just in the Hamptons, the North Fork too. They have the same issues as we do in terms of hospital overutilization right now. The big problem is just the number of people who are needing to be hospitalized, not the total population size, although the two do relate together. Hannah, why don't we go to the next question, please?
Okay, this question is from Jeanette in Bellport. She asks, what is going to happen to my healthcare if I lose my job? I can see being laid off anytime now, and I cannot afford to make COBRA copays.
Jeanette, that too is a great question, and it points out something that Congress really must address, and they haven't yet. In the past, when we've had economic downturns, like in 2008, many people lost their job, and Congress helped them by subsidizing their payments to COBRA. And for people who don't know, COBRA is a way that when someone loses their job, they can continue to get their former employer's health plan, but they have to pay for it themselves. It gives them the ability to get a better health plan than they'd otherwise get through the exchanges. And we have a lot of need to improve our healthcare system. I personally believe in universal healthcare. Healthcare is a right, it's not a privilege. And we have to find a way that every American can get access to affordable healthcare. We need to improve what we have. The ACA brought us a long way, but we need to do better. And I'd like to see a public option in the future and other ways that improve on what's available to people. But that's the future. You're talking about, Jeanette, in immediate need. We need to get you through this crisis. And if you lose your job, you shouldn't also lose your health care. We have to find a way to help you. And Congress should look at past precedent and subsidize those COBRA payments. I actually wrote an op-ed about this that was published about a week ago in one of the Setauket papers. So it's an important issue. It's something I'm aware of. It's something many of the labor unions are aware of and are pushing for. We need to do better, because if you have employer health insurance, that's something you bargained for, and it shouldn't just be taken away from you because of this COVID crisis. When you most need health care, you shouldn't be fearing losing it. I hope that's a good answer for you. Hannah, why don't we go on to the next question, please?
Okay. So this is from Charisse in Smithtown. She said, I heard that women are not getting the coronavirus as much as men. Why is that? And are there studies being done?
I'm going to turn that one over to the health professionals.
I'll take my first stab because I just read about at least 2 large clinical trials that are looking at the role of progesterone and estrogen They think there's something going on, but they're not quite sure what it is. It seems to be maybe some combination of factors. They don't seem to think it's strictly hormonal because they're saying, well, these are even 90-year-old women who are not getting COVID who may have been exposed. So it's probably not just some kind of hormonal issue, but some other combination of factors. Whatever it is, yay women. Bill, what do you think it is?
I don't know. I've heard about those studies also, Robin, and I learned to live. I'm willing to learn more. Obviously, in China, the men seem to be more affected than the women, and one of the reasons given at that time, I don't know how valid it is that smoking is so much more common among men, such that when they get the infection, they're more likely to get a severe infection. That may also, at least over there, have been a contributing factor. But there's more to that story.
Actually, I'd like to ask a question, Dr. Schaffner, of you, since you brought up smoking. How big a role do you think smoking plays in the severity of infection that people get? And what about vaping, which is something we heard a lot about earlier this year and last year, but I haven't heard so much about it recently.
Well, obviously, vaping and smoking, you do that long enough and in sufficient volume, you're going to get lung injury. We all know that. Smoking's not good for your lungs. And if you start with a respiratory infection on top of lung injury already, you are guaranteed to have a more severe course. You're less likely to do well. You probably will have to go to the intensive care unit. So those are the, if you have any kind of underlying lung injury, you're going to do less well when you get hit by a new insult, such as that created by the coronavirus.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we do two more questions and then we'll wrap it up. We've been going for, we're into our second hour. Hannah, why don't you do one more question and then we'll do one more after that, please.
Okay. So this question is from David on Zoom. Do you think younger children in primary school or preschool produce infectious virus even when they are asymptomatic? How much of a problem will that be if their schools reopen?
I'm going to turn that one over to the healthcare people.
Well, I don't think we know yet if asymptomatic adults actually can spread this virus. I haven't seen any studies yet like that, but I'm happy to be educated here tonight. So insofar as children, we don't know about adults. I don't think we have any idea yet about that. But it does seem very curious that children can get infected. Some of them have gotten infected, sadly. Several have gotten very sick and have died. But in general, they do not seem to be getting the same very severe symptoms as adults. And that is an interesting and very unique fact about this particular outbreak, or pandemic, we should say.
Yeah, it's from the beginning. This was a really striking epidemiologic feature of this illness. All of this severe disease in adults, but young children and through middle-aged adults were not nearly as severely affected. And we still haven't come, as Robin says, to the answer for that. Do these children and young adults get infected but not get sick? Or for some reason they must be exposed to the virus. Do they somehow, are they constructed in such a way or have a biological mechanism so that the virus can attach to their mucous membrane cells and initiate infection? We don't know anything about that yet. It's very, very provocative.
Thank you. Okay, Hannah, last question.
Okay, this question is from Debbie from Baldwin, and she submitted this before the town hall. She asks, when will we get back to normal, and what exactly does the new normal look like?
Debbie, that's something that's on all of our minds. It would be great if we could say we'll be normal in the fall. But I think realistically we'll be in some new normal that has some component of social distancing for the foreseeable future. Hopefully we'll be able to coexist with social distancing and not have a second wave or not have a severe second wave. But it's going to take until we have a vaccine that is distributed to enough people before we get to that new normal. This disease is very, very severe. Doesn't affect everyone, and it's sounding like the mortality rate isn't as bad as they first thought when they were talking numbers like 10%. But it's still much worse than the flu. And we have to take it very, very seriously. Dr. Schachter or Robin, anything to add?
Robin, would you like to go
Well,
first?
Thank you, such a gentleman. I'm very reassured this past week. I went to some very cutting edge biology lectures from NYU, some of these public-private partnerships, and what they're doing for treatment. So we have a whole bunch thinking about vaccine, but a whole slew of the incredible machinery that is in the United States for biotechnology. And they are working on incredible things on surfactant, things with the lung. They're hitting it in every which way with all kinds of interesting molecular combinations they're making. And that makes me feel very reassured that people will not have to be as afraid, because at least if we don't have a vaccine, we may have some very effective treatments. And those, I think, will come sooner than the vaccine. At least I hope so.
So my comment would be, you notice time marches on. We can't go back in time to the old normal. As we go forward, there will be a new normal. Who knows? Maybe next influenza season, for example, everyone will wear a mask, because that will be the new fashion statement to protect us both against influenza as well as COVID-19. Will we have as many business meetings in person? I don't think so. We've learned we can do virtual business meetings. Maybe less business travel for the same reason. So there are lots of things that I think will have to change as we move into the new normal. And we all hope, you've heard us say this many times before, that we want a vaccine to succeed. Because once we have a safe and effective vaccine, and we can distribute it not only here, but around the world, then we can return more so to what we remember. But it will be a new normal of another sort.
Thank you. Let me add to that in closing. In terms of a new normal, the new normal post-vaccine doesn't have to be the same as the normal we left. It can be better. And I think we should all look at this as an opportunity to make our society better. That means delivering healthcare to people, everybody in our country. We have accepted, as we deal with this pandemic, that everybody should have a right to treatment for it. And we're making testing and treatment available to everyone. Maybe we'll expand that to all of healthcare. Maybe that's something that America is now ready for. And it's something we can take out of this crisis and make ourselves better. Similarly, we're using less oil and burning less fossil fuels today than we were 3 months ago. Maybe we can keep that up and work on developing alternative sources of energy instead of going back to what we were before. Let's make this thing make us better. That's a future I think we can all look forward to. And that's the way I'd like to close. I want to say thank you to our two guests, Dr. Schachter and Dr. Gershon. I appreciate your coming on with us a second time and really helping the people here in New York One better understand the coronavirus COVID-19 epidemic and how we move forward with our lives, dealing with it and getting over it and getting past it. We had a lot of great questions tonight. And for the people who stayed with us from start to finish, thank you for listening. If we did not get to your question, email it to us. Email it to campaign@perrygershon.com, and I'll be sure to get you an answer personally. I want to answer questions. That's what I like to do. That's why I'm running. I'm here to help. And with that, thank you everybody for joining us. And until our next campaign event, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night, all.